Michael Maibach is a seasoned professional in the global business diplomacy, advisor to non-profit organizations, and a supporter of civic engagement. Michael was born at St. Francis Hospital, attended St. Philomeno School, and graduated from Bergen High School. He was recently back for a class reunion and spoke in downtown, and I heard he did a fantastic job. So I contacted him and asked him if he could speak on Zoom today. From 2003 to 2012, he was president and CEO of the European American Business Council, a group of 75 multinational companies. From 1983 to 2001, Mr. Maibach was vice president of global government affairs for the Intel Corporation. At Intel, he built a global team of 150 professionals advancing the company's commercial policies. From 1976 to 1983, he was the government affairs manager at Caterpillar in Illinois, California, and Washington, D.C. His initial job at Cat was a machine shop foreman in their East Peoria tractor factory. Today, he's a distinguished fellow at American Federalism at Save Our States, an organization dedicated to defending the founders' federalism and constitutional electoral college. He is the founder of the Center for the Electoral College. In 2020 and again this year, he was elected by his party to be a Virginia presidential elector. Mr. Maibach has earned 7 university degrees. While earning his first degree, he was elected to the DeKalb County Board in his native Illinois, becoming the first American elected to public office under 21 years of age. After growing up in Peoria, he spent his Intel career in California's Silicon Valley. He has lived in Old Town, Alexandria, Virginia for 25 years and has a winter home in Naples, Florida. Please welcome Michael Maibach.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Well, such an honor to be in my hometown. If unfortunately, virtually, I just was back from my high school reunion, and I was honored to give a talk to the Peoria downtown Rotary, but to also be asked to speak with your club is quite an honor. Can you see my slides all right? Is that?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I think that Paul Harris is right there in Chicago in about 1905 when he started the Rotary Club. And as you know, over 1 million, I think 1.4 million Americans and people all over the world belong to Rotary clubs. And what a wonderful history coming from the state of Illinois. Another historic thing is our Constitution of 1787. It's the world's oldest Constitution, really the world's first Constitution of any importance at all. Schumpeter said that talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see. No one had written the Constitution before our founders, and really no one had the idea to use the Constitution to limit government to keep people free. To understand the Constitution, we have to understand the founders studied human nature. They read the Bible a lot, and there's all kinds of problematic behavior in people in that and other works. And they conditioned their political science. They thought of their design of our Constitution as a form of science, conditioned it by our nature, our broken nature. Today, we're going to talk about the Electoral College. I'm going to move very quickly because I don't have a lot of your time today. Some people say the Electoral College is undemocratic. It's a form of voter suppression, that the majority should always rule. Many people talk today about the idea of saving our democracy. I think the founders would say, save our republic. It certainly is not a democracy. The word democracy is not found in the Constitution. They feared majority tyranny. In the age of 1776, we have to keep in mind that we were in this country at the time surrounded by 3 great powers, and Hamilton writes, in Federalist 11, Europe has extended its dominion over all to plume herself the mistress of the world, let Americans disdain to be the instruments of European greatness. But there they are, the Spanish to the south, the French, and then the British, who then went to Canada after losing our part of the world. We also had tyranny, slavery, and poverty everywhere. We did not invent slavery in 1619 in Virginia. My gosh, it is all over the world. But first, I show students pictures of world leaders in 1776. Catherine the Great, King Charles III in Spain, Louis XVI in France, and of course, George III, with whom we had a war. Slave markets in ancient Rome, in Cairo. There were slave markets and slave trade routes in Africa and throughout the Middle Ages. It's always been a scourge. From 1650 to 1860, 10 to 15 million slaves were brought from Africa to the Americas, both South and North America. Those slaves were sold to Europeans by tribes in Africa who had captured their enemies in order to sell them into slavery. So I like to set the stage that the founders grew up in a period when all the world had tyrants and slaves, for us to fully appreciate the hole in which they dug themselves out of as best they could in one generation. And they did study history. And Cicero, the great statesman from the Roman Republic, tells us if you don't know history, you'll always be a child. This is downtown DC before we put in the metro. More seriously, this is ruins that remind us that our historic roots are deep into Western civilization. So we'll look at Greece and the trial of Socrates. Socrates was on trial for questioning the war with Sparta, with not honoring all the Greek gods. And he was convicted by a jury of 300 of his peers in that town of Athens, that city-state, and was condemned to death for asking questions. And so I ask young people, can elected assemblies or juries become tyrannical? Yes, they can. And do you believe in free speech? The founders believed in free speech and were concerned about majority tyranny. Here's the famous painting of Death of Socrates, painted by David in Paris the same summer we were writing our Constitution. It was painted in 1787. Plato, who was pictured there with his hand on the knee of Socrates, Socrates was Plato's teacher, writes a book called The Republic, in which he reviews the different types of government. And in chapter 8, he says, tyrannies naturally arise out of democracies. The number one student of Plato was Aristotle. He struggled with the problem of democracy, and in his book, The Politics, he came up with the idea of checks and balances, a mixed regime of a king and aristocracy and citizens. And indeed, the Romans read this book, and they created a Caesar, a Senate, and Republican assemblies. And here are the checks and balances, the schematic of the Roman Empire. And yet we look at Isaiah 33:22, the Lord is the judge, the lawgiver, and the king. The three branches, there they are in the Old Testament, 300 years before Aristotle wrote his book. There was a Roman Senate. They had a logo. There it is right there. But Julius Caesar was assassinated by the Roman Senate, including Brutus, Ate Brutus. This is the Beware the Ides of March 15th. 44 BC. That was the end of the Roman Republic, and it became the Roman Empire. The founders, of course, knew this history. The reason Washington, D.C. sort of looks like Rome is the founders wanted to have a Roman Republic-style government. We wanted to have Republican government and not fail at it. The number one book the founders quoted was the Bible, more than any other book in their writings, correspondence, speeches. The number one book they quoted was Deuteronomy and also Romans. The Liberty Bell has an Old Testament quote, one sentence, proclaim liberty. The founders were all about liberty. The number two book they quoted was Montesquieu's book, written in 1748 when the founders were very young. They probably read it in the original French. Montesquieu spent 20 years studying why democracies fail, and he came up with the modern idea of the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branch. The Romans really didn't have the judicial branch as part of their scheme. Our founders knew to limit a king or any ruler, you had to have things in writing. And therefore, we have the first Constitution. Jefferson writes in the Questions of Power, then, let no more be heard of confidence in man, because, of course, he has a broken nature. Bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. We have a Constitution to limit government and therefore keep us free. So the founders wanted Republican government. We got it with the three branches. Matter of fact, they require in the Constitution all 50 states have three branches, or they were not allowed to come into the Union. Arizona, their petition to become a state was rejected until they had this full structure. Madison arrives in Philadelphia in May 1787. He's the guy that got everybody to come to town to rewrite the Constitution. And he writes in his diary, the central problem we'll face is representation. We have 13 states with very different populations. Maine and Massachusetts was one state, and they had Boston. New York was a big city. Pennsylvania had the largest city, Philadelphia, and Virginia, the largest population, 750,000 people approximately, 10 times Georgia's population. Delaware had fewer, and Rhode Island did not even send delegates to the Constitutional Convention, so much they feared the large state, Jimmy Madison and George Washington, would come to town to take over the country. But the Virginia plan failed. The New Jersey plan failed. The Great Compromise was struck by Madison and Roger Sherman of Connecticut, a small state, wherein the compromise was the House would be by population, but the Senate would be 2 senators for every state, no matter if you're Rhode Island or you're New York. And of course, we have that same structure today. The only reason we have a constitution is because of this compromise. The last week of the convention, they had not decided how to elect a head of government, a president, what we have today. Popular election, no, it would always be somebody from New York or Philadelphia or Virginia. Election by Congress, well, there would be no check and balance. It would not be aligned with this idea that the president should be separate from the legislature, to veto things, to have appointments that the Senate then would confirm. So unlike the British system that they looked at, election by the states. And so our Electoral College is really election of 13 Democratic votes, 50 Democratic votes in 50 states, and then we aggregate them. The Electoral College is not a problem. It was a solution to the problem of selecting a head of government. And we also had a chief executive as well as a commander-in-chief by that. And so American federalism comes about just like Montesquieu had envisioned. We have to keep in mind that the founders lived in the age of Newtonian physics or science. It was the scientific revolution. And he had a second law of triangles that I won't mention right now, but the strongest structure in geometry is the triangle. And this is why our bridges are full of triangles and not circles or squares. The triangle is the strongest structure. The checks and balances reflect this. Now we have the triangle and how we govern ourselves. If a bill passes the House, it's not a law. The House and Senate, it's not a law. The House and Senate and the signature by the president is a law. That is the triangles of lawmaking. But we also have this in the court system. Before you can lose your life or your property, you have 3 chances. You have the district court, the appellate court, and the Supreme Court, another triangle of liberty. And so when we elect a president, we have 3 steps. We have 50 Democratic votes. Then the electors go to the state capitals, and they, in a disaggregated way, on the same day at the same time, they cast their votes on behalf of their state. And then the first week of January, as we know, the Congress then accepts those, and any objections are made in the Congress. There are 3 steps to elect a president. So what we have really is we have concurrent majorities, majority rule, but majority rule 3 times. So for example, 2-year House terms, 6-year Senate terms, 4-year presidential terms, and therefore the sense of the nation is taken 3 different times before we make a law. But we also have checks and balances at Caterpillar. They have a management, they have a board of directors, they have outside auditor, they also have shareholders. So if anything is transparent and free, it will have the triangles of freedom. Now let's look at the impact of the Electoral College. In 1860, the most contentious, important election we've had thus far, anyway, Lincoln was one of 4 candidates for president. He was not on the ballot in most of the southern states, and he only won 39.8% of the vote. That's lower than any other president in American history to this day. But he won the majority of the states, 18 out of 33, and therefore he was seen as legitimate. Now, if anyone thinks the Electoral College is Democratic or Republican, since 1904, we've had 15 Democrats and 15 Republicans elected as president. So it's really not to be seen as a partisan thing. Now, let's talk about World Series. As you know, it's best out of 7 games. This is the 1960 famous Pirates Mazeroski walk-off home run, bottom of the 9th, 3 games to 3 games. The Pirates were down with 2 outs, 2 on base. The Yankees were ahead. They were going to win. Bill Mazeroski, seen there, third baseman, hits a home run. He wins the game. He wins the World Series. Everybody agrees the Pirates won the World Series. Well, in those 7 games, the Pirates had a total of 27 runs. The Yankees had a total of 55 runs, twice as many. So is that fair? Well, when the Super Bowl, the Final Four in basketball, it's all about games, not about points. We run our system pretty much the same way as sports are run. Let's talk about the European Union. They have 27 member countries. They all have a picture every year. These are the heads of government of the European Union. And of those, how many, if I was in person, I would ask you in person, how many are elected by national popular vote? Only Cyprus and France. Of these 27 leaders, only 2 are elected by national popular vote. The rest are elected by their parliament. Why is that? Well, the French Revolution didn't end well, and it ended up with a king. The French Revolution, again, in 1848, didn't go very well. And in 1848, 30 European countries had riots in the street, sort of like the George Floyd riots, but for 2 years. And therefore, mob rule, majority rule was greatly feared by the Europeans. Therefore, this is the Electoral College of Great Britain. 600 members. They elect the prime minister, and they just did. After getting 34 votes, 34% of the vote, the majority, the plurality party elected a new prime minister. Mr. Churchill was never on the ballot of all Englishmen, or Mrs. Thatcher, or the current prime minister. Only these people elect their prime minister. This is the Electoral College of Germany. Of Spain, I could show 25 of these. People don't trust national popular vote in Europe, that's for sure, nor do the Canadians. They have 6 political parties, but this body here, their parliament, that's who elects their prime minister. This man is their prime minister, Justin Trudeau. His party in 2021 got 33% of the vote. The Conservative Party got 34% of the vote, but Trudeau won more seats or more games in the sports analogy, and therefore he is the prime minister. And all of Europe and Canada don't even have 39.8% of the vote that Lincoln got. The prime minister of Italy today has 25% of the vote, and in the UK it's 34%. So our system is much more focused on majority rule than any of these republics. And here they are, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, that elected by parliament, Norway, India, Morocco, etc. Now, some people still say the majority should rule. So I'm going to show you flags of countries that have a national popular vote for their head of government. Get out your pens. This is where you want to vacation. You want to vacation places like Iran, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Russia, Afghanistan, Mexico, Turkey, Zimbabwe, all elected by national popular vote. And these are not well-governed places. But there is an effort called the National Popular Vote Compact. 17 state legislatures, including Illinois, have passed it that says that no matter how the voters of our state vote, the majority of the country's popular vote should be aggregated and they should rule. Well, these are the states with by population. 9 of our states have half of our people, and the rest are feeding those states. New York City has more people than 39 states, and Los Angeles County, more people than 41 states. This is LA County. These people that live in these cars, these cars don't move anymore. There's refrigerators and they have internet access. They sleep in the back seats. This is life in LA County. This is Montana, a very different place, different mindset, different way of life. C'est la vie, right? This is Manhattan. It's an island, but it has a big park. It's 843 acres. And I asked if I was in person, how many acres in this park are farmed? And of course, the answer is they walk their dogs there, they play baseball there, they jog there, they do not farm. And yet here's a Whole Foods in Manhattan full of produce, full of food, and yet they don't farm their own territory. That's why we start the primary in Iowa, because they feed the cities. It takes 5 acres to feed each one of us. Then we go to New Hampshire, a first state, a very small state, small towns, small businesses. Here's a man that wants to give free advice. He probably has 3 meals with presidential candidates every time we have an election. And here are some pictures from New Hampshire places, Mrs. Clinton, Mr. Trump, Mr. Reagan, Mr. Bush, all seen in New Hampshire, where people get many shots at talking to people in person. After New Hampshire and Iowa, we go to screens and platforms and TV programs. We don't have the kind of one-to-one filter that we do in the first two. Now, there are only 2 basic industries, agriculture and mining. In the building you're in, all the devices you have all come from mining, and all the food you had today at lunch comes from agriculture. We have different crops in different regions in this wonderful country. Wheat producing states are here. They don't produce any wheat in New York or California, for example. This is the country's largest iron ore mine. And why does it matter? Well, this is where I used to be a foreman in line 1019 in building KK, I think it was called, in East Peoria. Well, that iron has to come from somewhere, and it doesn't come from downtown Chicago or downtown Peoria. This is where we get the natural gas and the oil to put in tractors, et cetera. We're a nation of 13 states. We have a majority rule by having 50 votes. Majority rule times 50. I'm going to end on a positive note, the sinking of the Titanic. You'll remember when they, in the movie, when they hit the iceberg, the guy who designed the ship lays out the design of the ship in front of the captain and the crew, and he says, to save money, we did not close off the compartments, and therefore the compartments will fill, and in 2.5 hours this ship will sink. And it did sink in 2.5 hours in real life, because the compartments were not full. So a national popular vote would sink our ship of state, and I'll tell you why. This is the Florida recount picture that's so famous. And so when Florida in 2001 was recounting their ballots, all the 49 states stood back and let Florida recount. We didn't have to have a national recount of 150 or more million people, which the litigation would never end in a country our size to have a recount of anything. But Florida made their decision, and we had our president. So we have 50 compartments that are sealed, unlike the Titanic. When we have elections, we're going to find, come November 5th, we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 states that are going to go on into overtime. Georgia, Nevada, Arizona, Pennsylvania, whatever it's going to be, like we had the last couple of elections, because people have changed their voting rules so often, and we have such early voting now that we didn't used to have, that we've changed all the rules of voting. Well, to conclude then, the USS Electoral College will keep us firm and safe in the water. The Constitution is the oldest in the world. We have a rich inheritance. Electoral College is part of that. Constitution has been amended 27 times. If they want to change it, they have to amend the Constitution. I'll end with the 4-way test, which is it the truth? I've tried to give you the best I know of the history and the truth. Is it fair to all concerned, not only the cities, but all parts of our country? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? I think if small rural areas are respected and small rural states are respected, I think it will. And therefore, this system will be beneficial to all. Lincoln said, don't interfere with anything in the Constitution. It must be maintained, for it is only the safeguard of our liberties. I'm sorry I spoke so fast, but I don't have a lot of time with Rotary. If you have a question or two, I'd be happy to.
Michael, we're going to take some questions.
Okay.
I'm going to walk around with the mic so they speak in the mic so you can hear.
Okay.
What is the question?
I just started reading a book called America's on Trial by Riley. And one thing it points out that the Constitution warned America against losing its virtue and of under God. And I was wondering what your opinion was on that.
Yeah, wonderful question. So if you look at your currency, if you look at your coin, there are three things: in God we trust, liberty, and e pluribus unum, one from one many. Those are on there by law, by the way, passed by the U.S. Congress. In his farewell address, Washington has 7 warnings, and I give a speech on that farewell address. And one of the warnings is, and Adam said this as well, this is a document, this Constitution, only for a spiritual people. And by that, they meant that no matter what your religion is, you have to understand that we are all broken. All of us are broken. We all need redemption, forgiveness, redemption, and understanding, and we have to treat each other with that respect. And when we lose faith in that understanding of the human condition, when we start to think there are some good people, but there are some bad people that need to be identified, this is identity politics and cancel culture. When we start dividing that way, we will not be e pluribus unum. We will not be one people from many. We will be many tribes. And we cannot do that. So we're going through a testing period right now. But one of the great things about Rotary clubs is no matter what your politics are, you're all in the same room and you're working together. And so it's a very good question. I think the Judeo-Christian roots of our government remind us that we have to treat each person with respect and forgive, and because we all need redemption, including your speaker. Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much. That was really interesting. And I just want to go ahead and throw this out here, because this has been an unprecedented election that we've been kind of watching happen, pulled out in front of us. And you were talking about the different electoral votes. I know there has been conversation on both sides about not in fact, I think it was California that said it's illegal to ask for ID. And some other states are pushing back on that. So how would you see that rolling out after the election as far as electoral votes go? I've heard some people saying that they shouldn't be included.
Yeah, thank you for your question. This really goes to the heart of my last few slides, which is that because we have 50 states with 50 different state laws and 50 different, for example, here in Virginia, we have 45 days of early voting. Believe it or not, we're already voting before we have all the facts. This is not a way to do things, but we have 23 states, as you mentioned, that do not require the kind of voter ID you're talking about, because they give driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. So we have 23 states giving driver's licenses. So when they go to the polls, how do the poll watchers know if they're a citizen or not? So it's these are very challenging things for us as a republic. And the answer is to have state legislatures that will say things like, you got to have a voter ID to walk in here and vote. I have to have a driver's license to get in certain government buildings, and certainly on an airplane or Amtrak. And so it's the least we can do. But the Constitution leaves this to every state. But the good news is, if California is allowing an extra 2 million illegal people to vote, Well, they still have the same amount of electors. They don't, in other words, illegal votes there are not counted as part of a national popular vote. They're counted just as California. So if we're worried about all these illegal immigrants who might be voting, because that's, we have millions of them now, at least they don't expand too much the electoral power of a given state.
No, Jill just made a comment.
Michael, thank you again. I'll echo everybody else. Thank you. This has been a terrific presentation. A follow-up on that last question, are there other countries that do not require some kind of voter ID?
I'm not aware of that. I'll tell you that Australia requires that you vote. You have to show up and be checked off the list. There are certain, quote, democracies or republics that require that, not very many. But I will check into that. I haven't done that for Europe, but require ID. I will if you want, I'll get back to you and find out of the 27 European republics, how many require a voter ID. I'd be willing to bet a lot of money that all of them do. I've been to 68 countries, and in each entrance, I had to show my passport. In America, you don't. This is very unusual in our history that, I've been to China 9 times. Every time I had to show my passport. I've been to Iraq and Jordan, and lots of places that are pretty marginal, and yet I had to show ID.
Okay, one more. All these years I've followed what I call the democratic process, and I've been involved in places from Anchorage to Virginia to here. And suddenly, in a very short time, our whole system of voting is being severely questioned.
Yes.
That to me is absolutely scary, because once we lose what we have, we would never, to me, be able to get it back.
Yes. Yeah. Francis Fukuyama wrote a book called The High Trust Society. And what he meant was the countries that where people trust each other have the most robust economies, and you're willing to go to, call somebody or go online and pay for something, and it'll be delivered. Whereas in other countries, if they don't have trust, they won't give their credit card out online and that sort of thing. In America, until COVID, now I'm 73 years old. Until COVID, and I've voted, starting with myself, I voted for myself in 1972. I've never missed an election. And until COVID, we always had election day, pretty much. And we didn't have drop boxes. We didn't have ballot harvesting. We didn't have weeks and months of early voting. And so when we all assembled with the same information on election day, not election season, we could all sit back and say, let's see what we all have decided. And we respected that. And there's so many people, both parties, I think, all parties, that say, gee, even what happens on November 5th, I don't know if I'm going to accept it, because we have so many variations of systems now. To have a drop box in a neighborhood where you just walk by and throw your ballot in without, you can throw, I guess, 5 ballots in. These systems do not engender trust. So I think state governments of both parties ought to get back to election day voting and not have all these innovations that in the name of convenience are costing us trust in our own elections. We want to trust our elections and respect the result, whatever it is. So thank you for that question, and I'm honored to be with you. I know it's 1 p.m. and you have other things to do, but I'm delighted to be with you. And if you have other audiences in person or otherwise, I do travel on these speeches. If you want me to give them to other people, I'd be happy to do it.
Perhaps one more question.
Okay.
And that is, you seem to be celebrating the founders of our country and the writers of the Constitution.
Yeah.
I guess my question is, what happened after them? Have we had a government that you could celebrate after that period? And if not, what happened? Thank you.
Well, of course, that's a long story. It's a 239-year-old story. But they thought in limiting the slave trade, that the Industrial Revolution would slowly but surely eliminate slavery. They weren't going to be able to do it with all 13 states have slaves. New York had more slaves than Georgia at the time when they wrote the Constitution. But the cotton gin was invented, I believe, in 1809, and the cotton gin mechanized slavery. And then we started on the road to civil war to end slavery violently, because it became an economic way of life for about a third of our states or more. And then, of course, we had to dig ourselves out of that to Jim Crow and all the rest. So we're not perfect at all. Man's nature is broken, but I think we, to the extent we are faithful to Judeo-Christian ethics and principles, we will get through this. But we're going through the worst time we've had since the Civil War, I think, because it's a cultural and spiritual challenge for all of us and both sides. And let's hope we come out. And Rotary clubs are the kind of places that help people get to know each other well enough to respect differences and to see that America is full of wonderful problem solvers and not just people that complain about things. So I admire what you do. Paul Harris would be so rejoiceful that you have this meeting today. And I congratulate you on your dedication to Peoria, Illinois.